The Buckeyes lose 1 to Georgia. Will it be 2? Welcome into Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We come your way typically on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, so mark it down. Subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Sometimes we have to switch up that schedule and want you to be here with us. We got Tony Gerdeman on the line. Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly is the podcast, and College Football Playbook that you can find right here on YouTube. Steve Hellwagon waiting in the wings to make a grand entrance. Tony, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am doing just fine, and had a conversation a number of times this week, but in particular on our USC show about the draw of quarterbacks. Regardless of the player and the position, there's a certain impact when a big recruit makes a decision. Dylan Raiola may have left a lot of Buckeyes fans' radar quite some time ago for good reason. I understand that. Looking at 3 different schools and made his commitment to Georgia. We've heard that before, but it's Georgia now. And Jeremiah Smith. And this is a comment that I think all 3 of you have made on the show many times, you in particular, about when Ohio State gets a commitment. In a sense, the further south it is, the less binding it may be, and the more that they need to hang on to that till the closing bell.
Yeah, I think Urban Meyer once said when he got to Ohio State, when a kid from Florida commits to you, that just means he's interested. And so you got to continue to work that. And especially for a guy that everybody wants and is the top receiver, arguably the top player in the 2024 class. And so I see the concern in the comments. Buckeye Huddle, Kevin Noon was down there, and Mark Givler were down there just this weekend talking to Jeremiah Smith. And it happened right after the commitment to the Raiola commitment to Georgia, when all of this stuff was starting to blow up, and Jeremiah Smith made some comment on social media, and Dylan Raiola is talking about, who he's going to go bring. I don't think Dylan Raiola has ever been a very good recruiter in terms of being a draw for other players. Of course, it would help if you're actually out of school for longer than a few months to be able to do that. So maybe he'll get that started with Georgia now. But what Jeremiah Smith told our guys and told Kevin, and I can just read it to you. The comment was, Ohio State, you all don't have any concern right now. I am locked in until anything happens with any of the coaches like Coach Hartline or Coach Ryan Day, but I doubt that happens. I am pretty much locked in. I am not going anywhere. And you can find that at buckeyehuddle.com. There's a full interview, full video of him talking about this stuff, talking about Ohio State. And another comment, he said, I want to be a first-round pick. That is really what I want to do. I feel like Coach Hartline is going to do that for me. And even before I saw that comment, before the interview, like earlier in the day, once this all started to blow up, I went and looked, and obviously I think we all remember the last Georgia first-round wide receiver, or the most prominent would be A.J. Green. That was, 2008? No. It was like 2011, something like that, because I think he was part of the 08 class. And the one before that was the other first-rounder from Georgia before that. Mark, would you care to guess?
First-round wide receiver before A.J. Green. I'm going to kick myself as soon as I hear the answer, but I won't let us just die with dead air. So hit
Lindsey
me.
Scott.
Oh, Lindsey Scott.
Back in like 1982. So basically 2 first-round receivers in the past 40 years compared to what Ohio State has done. I think maybe like 10-1 in that time frame. So just interesting that, I was looking for that. And then shortly thereafter, Jeremiah Smith says, I want to be a first-round wide receiver. And so I think right now, Ohio State is always going to be concerned in terms of making sure he's happy and everybody is, connected and doing well. But right now, I mean, he's saying all of the right things and doing all of the right things. And so at this point, I would still expect him to be a Buckeye, because it's not like Ohio State doesn't have a quarterback in the 2024 class. They do. They have Aaron Noland, who just won the Elite 11 regional MVP down there in Atlanta while Kevin and Mark were down there. So over Jaden Davis, Michigan commit.
Here it is. Hey, Yeah, so interesting there. I know that I did see, and I don't know if this was Kevin's interview. I didn't hear the interviewer, but saw the video clip of the interview down there on one of the platforms, and then I saw it scattered around social media, not to any heavy degree. So I don't know if there was a trace of teasing by Jeremiah Smith. It seemed that he played it pretty straight based on what you said, but was there a little tease put out there?
Well, I mean, I did see him tweet that he's just messing around, relax, that sort of thing. So again, I think my number one piece of advice is to never go overboard on what a teenager tweets in any aspect, whether this is sports, politics, religion, math, whatever. Just realize that it's a teenager, and think back when you were a 16 or 17-year old. How seriously would you take yourself now?
Yeah, there's a good thing social media wasn't around back then,
Oh man.
for sure, for sure.
I mean, just imagine now, like going back to see the stuff that you would have tweeted at like 16 or 17. It would be bad.
Yeah, I would have been lashing out left and right. I was not an angry individual in that way, but I was always ready to pick a verbal fight. I had no issue with doing that. Maybe one reason why I do this. So we've got Justin here. So yes, listen to Tony, Justin. Don't go by your feelings here on this one. Just rest easy and everything will be fine.
Although,
Everything will be fine.
let me just throw in this one caveat, because a couple of weeks ago I was talking to Mylan Graham, and I see Debo asking about Mylan Graham, and this is in Obetz in South Columbus. And Mylan Graham, I asked him, "Are you going to be taking any more visits?" And he said, "No, I'm not taking any more visits." And then, like the next weekend, he was on a visit to another school with his team. So, like, you know, I don't think Jeremiah Smith is going anywhere, but that doesn't mean visits aren't going to happen, because again, a lot of these guys travel in packs, with be it school, be it their 7-on-7 team, be it, whatever. They'll just, why not? I'm just going to go along for the ride, hang out with my friends, go see a school. And then we make a lot out of that. And sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong.
And we have to understand that certain aspects of life are pretty similar for each one of us, but then we are individuals. So yes, one individual going to other schools while he's committed to another school could be a dangerous thing in regards to a commitment. Of course, he could be wowed by the latest flashy thing in front of him, but others not. I can't answer that question for each individual. It's just a thing that goes from case to case. So, Ryan, we thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate you being here, sir. Is there a scenario in the new Big Ten and expanded playoffs where Ohio State and Michigan play twice or even three times in a season? That begs the question, is too much of a good thing bad?
Yeah, and we can bring Steve on and see what he thinks about this. But that is absolutely a possibility, because that, the one regular season matchup, then the Big Ten championship game matchup, then the playoff matchup. And I don't even know how we'll feel about it until it's here, because now we say it's too much of a good thing, but each one of those matchups are going to be significant in their own way, and they'll have their own build up. And then maybe the Big Ten championship game, it won't necessarily be as big, because if both teams are getting in, like if they go in there undefeated, or I guess even with they wouldn't go into the Big Ten championship game undefeated. Somebody's going to have a loss. But as a second loss, say Ohio State beats Michigan 2 straight times, is that going to knock out a 2-loss Michigan team from the playoffs if their only losses are to Ohio State? No. So they'll go into that game probably both knowing that they're both going to make the playoffs. So maybe the Big Ten championship game isn't as big as the regular season game or the playoff game, but I think they'll have their own, just atmospheres, each of them. And I don't know that it's again. I think we'll know more how we feel when we're in it than now. I still think they're all going to be very, very big.
Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Steve, As
Hey
always,
guys, what's
great to
going
have you
on?
here.
I heard the tail end of your Smith conversation. Very interesting stuff there. And regarding this, um, yeah, there's the possibility the teams could play a second time in a Big Ten championship game. And if that happens, the ramifications of that are probably both teams are in the playoff, but the winner will get a bye and the loser will get to host a game, as a 5 to 8 seed, so that's what the stakes of those type games could look like. And then potentially in this, in the playoff, semifinals or championship game or whatever, could have been the championship game this past year had everything fallen the way that it probably could have and should have. But you know, think about Duke and North Carolina. They played an extra game. I think it was last year, not this past school year, but the year before, in the Final Four. And as memory serves me correct, the year that there were three Big East teams in the Final Four, way back when Villanova won it, like 1985, I think two of those teams may have played each other 4 times, twice in the regular season, once in the conference tournament, and then once in the Final Four. I don't recall which matchup it was, but yeah, it was, I don't think anybody complained when it was Duke and North Carolina in the Final Four in basketball. I think everybody thought, man, this is interesting, isn't it? And another great chapter in their lore, so to speak. I think one of the issues is if there's a rematch 7 days later, and okay, we've already proven we can beat this team. We may have even gone on the road and beaten this team, and now we have to turn around and do it again 7 days later. And the team that lost is going to be ultra motivated to not lose a second time to their rival in an 8-day period. Boy, that'd be the doozy of all doozies to lose to them twice in one season. So you pull out heaven and earth and all the stops to avoid that from happening. And it negates the first win, which could have even been on the road at the other team's stadium. So, man, I don't know. That's a lot of stuff. The Big 12's been dealing with this with automatic rematches in the last several years because they play a full round robin of 9 regular season games, and then there is a rematch with 2 of those teams playing each other. So you've had Texas and Oklahoma, great rivalry, in the rematch in the championship game in some years, and that's automatically dictated as a rematch into this format because it won't be in the Big Ten going forward because there'll be 16 teams and there'll be some buys, but or some teams that you don't play. But so yeah, I think it's interesting. I think a lot of different dynamics to it, and one way or the other, somebody's going to come out of that second or third game with some real bragging rights, no doubt about it.
The goal of negating the regular season win with a conference championship win is just that shouldn't sit right with anybody, and yet it is pretty amazing.
It'll sit right with the team who's the fans of the team who won. Yeah, see that banner? We won the Big Ten championship.
We would have had nonstop debate, talk that would have never ended and dissected every play had those two met, of course, in the national championship game, had Ohio State won that game. And then you've got Michigan bragging rights. We beat you a second consecutive season. We won the Big Ten championship, the Ohio State bragging rights, of course, winning the rematch in the national championship. Or even if Michigan doesn't make the national championship, Ohio State wins a national championship without beating Michigan. I was set up for that scenario for the offseason to think, the debate between who had the better season, who's got the bragging rights when a team wins a national championship but loses to its rival. I was sitting here trying to come up with a worst case scenario of Ohio State, Michigan in a particular season in a 12-team playoff. I guess one would be that the unlikelihood that USC or Penn State has won the Big Ten, but they're both going to the playoff, and therefore they're playing a final game of the regular season both secure in the playoff, but without a chance of winning the Big Ten championship.
So you just like if USC just leaves their starters at home and doesn't travel to Happy Valley, and you just rest up for the playoffs. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, let's say USC has the tiebreaker and they're undefeated, and Ohio State and Michigan each have a loss, and they have no shot of winning the Big Ten championship, and they're just playing a regular rivalry game, which in the past has always been sufficient enough. But knowing too that they're secure in their playoff status, they're both 10-1. That it would just make for a bit of a lackluster setting.
Yeah, I've heard people speculate on that, even regards to a second Ohio State Michigan game or something like that, or resting starters. I guess it will probably happen at some point, but it hasn't happened yet, and there's been not necessarily an instance for it to happen. Although I guess Georgia probably could have. At any point, Georgia could rest their starters for a game and be okay, especially with their non-conference. We'll see it when it happens. Then I can't say it's not going to happen because I kind of expect it to, but it would be unfortunate, being that college football is such or I guess it used to be a regular season sport, and to just give up one of those games. It's unfortunate, but I guess is that the price for the playoffs? I guess. And it is, if the coaches and the players are willing to accept it, I guess the other question is how would the players feel about that?
This is what we're coming to, is that whatever we've accepted as the normal in the past is no longer going to be normal. And I think that that's what we have to come to grips with, that what was perfect setup in the past is no longer a perfect setup. Even, that you said Ohio State and Michigan would play for the Big Ten Eastern Division Championship and the berth in the championship game, that's no longer true. So, or could be, no longer true if they go to one large division. So, I guess we just have to come to grips with the idea that it's going to be an imperfect world, and there's going to be much more asked of the coaches and players than has ever been before. And what we've always thought should be the end all be all on November the 25th is no longer the end all be all. And that's just going to have to be the fact of the matter going forward, that there are truly bigger fish to fry in the weeks following that game than in that game. So, I mean, it could have some stakes in terms of getting a bye or a home field game or whatever. But beyond that, it's just going to be a footnote, it seems like, in a lot of years into what, they won the national championship. Oh, and earlier in the season, they continued their mastery over their rival. That's how it's going to be regarded. I think that it's just a footnote along the way. I wouldn't say it's a week 7 game dropped to that lack of importance, but it is certainly going to be less important as the years go on.
For as much as I've pushed for an expanded playoff, more from the standpoint of I want a fair and equitable playoff, I've looked at it logistically, and I've looked at it in regards to what I believe is fair and just, and giving every conference an opportunity and all of that in terms of the feel and the visceral response to it. This is where the more we talk about a 12-team playoff, the more I don't like it. So, yeah.
But how do you think you're going to feel in the midst of it, as with conference championship weekend next year, and then that leading into it? Like, this is going to be the biggest thing in college football history. But I understand some of the concerns for it, absolutely. But how do you think you're going to feel when you're in the midst of it?
I think some of it will depend on the matchups that we get. And I think what has hurt the New Year's Six is the idea that, you have an ACC champion that's ranked 20th, some year that gets a spot. And, you know, in the years where the Sugar Bowl doesn't have the semifinals, they still put an SEC team in there that didn't make the playoff, and they could be ranked 15th or 18th or whatever. And it just, those games just didn't catch maybe the imagination. I think if we get what we think are good matchups, 5 versus 12, let's say, and whatever it is, 6 versus 11, 7 versus 10, and 8 versus 9, and they're teams that we believe are good to great teams, and they make good, compelling matchups. And then you go to the quarterfinal round, and 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, or whatever, and they're good, compelling matchups, and they're not 40-point blowouts, then I think that we have something. But if there is, as we've seen in some of these recent years, a clear top 3 or 4 that would just blow everybody else out on a neutral field or whatever, then I think it may not be what everyone's looking for. But I think that the opportunity and the chance to put some matchups that we don't normally get to see on the field, I think, is a positive thing. So I'm just hoping that people keep an open mind, and that we get the matchups that we want and we deserve, is kind of how I look at it.
And not just different matchups, but in unique places on campus for those first rounders.
Yep.
That's going to be cool. Yeah. Or cold.
Literally and figuratively, it's going to be cool.
Yeah. But I think we're in the midst of getting more football. We're going to get more good football, more great football, more bad football. We're going to get the variety of all of that. I do believe that unless things change, we're going to be watching, at least my feeling in watching, let's say, Penn State and Tennessee in their current status as a 7-10 or 8-9 game. I'll say, I'm all in for this, watching a good football game, 2 good teams, but I don't anticipate that either one of these 2 teams is going to factor truly into the national championship.
Yeah, you make a good point there. They're just adding. I mean, they went from 4 to 12 for no reason. It could have gone to 8 to see how we like it, before they added this extra layer of dumb BS in there with these, cockamamie games on campuses. So, is what it is.
I definitely think we're going to get more good games, because and we will obviously get more bad games, but we have gotten so many bad games from the CFP that expanding the playoffs will give us more opportunity for good games. But like last year was the first time that there was 2 semifinal games that there wasn't a game in the semifinals that was decided by at least 17 points. Like in terms of both of those games were close. Every other year, there's been at least one game that has been decided by at least 17 points or more in the semifinals. And you can do the same thing for the championship game. I'm just looking like you've had 3 decided by 1 score, and that was the 15, 16, and 2017 season. Everything else has been multiple touchdowns. So, we may still end up with a blowout at the end, and there'll be some blowouts in the beginning as well, but we'll get more good games and more games like the 2 semifinals last year, I think. And that's a win.
Absolutely. Appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football, Ohio State Live, each and every Wednesday, typically at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Lock it in. We got Tony Gerdeman here. Check out his work at Buckeye Weekly, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Buckeye Weekly is the podcast, College Football Playbook right here on YouTube. And, of course, Steve Hellwagon at 247 Sports, Bucknuts. And Steve, gracious enough to post our live stream here each and every week on Bucknuts. Which brings us to what was posted by The Athletic. I don't know if they were the first If this was posted elsewhere, don't want to give credit erroneously, but that's where I saw it. And that's the Big Ten proposed schedule going forward. And as a footnote and a transition note between these two topics, are conference championship games, because we just came through a season in which 4 of the 5 were meaningless. I didn't know that we would arrive at that place. The ACC, neither team would have made the playoff regardless, meaningless. LSU, Georgia. Georgia could lose the SEC championship they're in. Meaningless game. Michigan already had a spot. Meaningless. TCU, Kansas State, we thought they were playing for a playoff spot. As it turned out, TCU didn't need to win that game. Meaningless. So USC gets knocked out in the Pac-12 championship game. 1 of 5 proved to be decisive for playoff berths. And now with a 12-team expansion, plus the expanded conferences, I think that really hurts and I love conference championship games, but I think that those might become passe to a certain extent, except for the money grab that's going to be the big point of argument.
I think the key there is that with the home field advantage, or the bye that gets you the conference title, as long as you're one of the top 4 ranked, one of those top 4 conference champions, you'll get a bye. So there's some incentive there. Still keeps things important, but in terms of the overall, like making the playoffs, like I've said before, I think there are going to be 3 lost teams in the playoffs at times, and depending how things go, and if one of those 3 lost teams win a conference or something like that, like if your 3 losses are to some very, very good teams, it's going to be hard for some of these committee members to not wash away at least one of those losses and put somebody in there. So yeah, as you said, the conference championship games are so diminished last year, but they still make money, so they're going to stick around. And I see people say, why not get rid of them? That would make things a little cleaner. But I think the one thing we've learned is they're never going to take games away. They're only going to add games.
So, Tony, thank you for filling in for me there. For some reason, I had a blank spot on the conference championship games being the even though I have talked about that every day for the last 2 years, and that was just kind of an automatic bullet point that came off my tongue. That's probably the first time I've ever just blanked on that point. Yes, that's going to keep the conference championship games relevant. I guess I've been so immersed in this possible expansion of all these conferences and trying to figure out how are they going to line up these conferences with 18 teams and 20 and 22 teams that they become almost mini NFLs among themselves, and you almost have to play a playoff, because there's no other way when there's so many teams not playing each other in the regular season to determine a conference championship game or a 4-team, mini playoff within the conference, that it becomes, you get to a point where you almost need an NFL tie-breaking system to determine who's even in the conference championship game or the conference semifinals. It becomes mathematically impossible to determine equitably.
Yeah, it's absurd. The whole thing, borders on absurdity when you come right down to it. And, I just saw somebody tweeted out what's going to be the tiebreaker for the ACC when they go to one division, I guess. And it's just kind of like, good luck with all of that. It's like, the old Jerry Seinfeld line, well, good luck with all of that. Because, as they expand and the Big Ten goes to 16 teams with USC and UCLA, I don't foresee the Big Ten. I know there was some talk about Oregon and Washington had been vetted for Big Ten membership or whatever. Somebody would have to show me the mathematics of that to where it makes sense to Ohio State, that Ohio State is going to net more money by adding Oregon and Washington. I just use Ohio State as an example. I mean, you could put Indiana in that sentence and whoever, who's going to net more money from the old guard, the 16, sitting Big Ten teams. Do they make more money by going to 18 teams? And I don't know that you do. I mean, I guess I'd need to see the math on that to know one way or the other. But at any rate, I'm of a mind that simpler is better. And I don't know. It just I don't know. Again, everything we've thought and held sacred in college football since we were, children is going by the wayside, and the sport's going to look a lot different in 10 years than it does today. I just have this gnawing feeling in my gut that it's going to look a lot different in 10 years than it does today.
So the three proposals out there, and I would like your feedback on what you prefer here, or if there's another option out there. But one is to protect two rivals and then split the rest of the conference into two groups that you play every other year. The second proposal is the protect three rivals, and then you split up the conference 6 and 7, I guess would be the math, into those two groupings, or a flex protect in which you determine that every school has a different number of rivals that need to be protected. And before I go off, we'll hear from each one of you, because I think it's rather obvious myself.
I've tried to do this and tried to protect three rivals, and I've put them on a spreadsheet, and it's pointless to do three rivals. I think there's maybe two or three schools where three rivals make sense, and it's like Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, like those. I think those four. You could say maybe Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, something like that, or but or Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan with Ohio State, Minnesota, and Michigan State. But I think you can get away with two, and then if you want to keep that third alive with just schedule them 6 out of every 8 years or something like that, keep people happy, don't end the rivalry. To me, I think 2 is plenty. Having tried to put them all together on a spreadsheet, and for some, like Rutgers, who is their second rival? Back in the day, they would tell you Michigan, but Michigan's not going to use one of their 2 spots. So I think 2 is plenty, and if you want to do 1, I'm also okay with that. But I think 2 is the sweet spot there, as Gene Smith would say.
Yeah, 2 probably makes most sense of anything. It's just USC and UCLA only have 1. I mean, they have each other. I mean, who would want to play them on an every other year basis on the road? I mean, guaranteed. I don't think anybody would want that. So I don't know. I mean, that sets up a scenario where, okay, USC is my rival and I have to go out there in 2023, but I've also got to at some point play a game at UCLA, so now I'm going out to the West Coast, 2 years in a row. Do I really, really want to do that? I mean, I don't know. It just, I don't know. They got a lot of tough questions they got to answer. And this is so far down the line, but how do you have a 16-team basketball tournament? I know nobody, in Big Ten land is got that front of mind. I get that. But at the same time, that's something that, another hoop. I mean, what do you do for all these Olympic sports? It just, I was doing our own Bucknut show with our publisher, Dan Rubin, and, we foresee a day where, football will have its own format, and then the Olympic sports will be back on some type of a regional grid, where you say, okay, here's the Midwest hockey powers, go for it. Here's the Midwest wrestling teams, go for it. And it doesn't matter if your football plays in ACC, Big Ten, or independent, or Big 12 or whatever. You're Midwest wrestling, or whatever. Just because for cost containment, if they just put their heads together, that just makes more sense, And yes, Cal and Stanford are pissed at USC and UCLA for going to the Big Ten in football, but it also makes sense for them to be part of West Coast baseball or West Coast softball, or whatever you want to call it. And the regular season TV rights can revert to maybe your football conference or whatever, and it really doesn't matter. It's just this thing, So I think cooler heads need to prevail on that, because it doesn't make any sense to spend millions of dollars flying money-losing lacrosse teams and swim teams and wrestling teams all over North America just because they're part of the same football conference. It just doesn't make any sense. So maybe that's a solution. But again, that's not front of mind for anybody who's just a football person, So there are football issues, and then there's everything else. So, and then there's also academic issues, both for the student athletes and the academic affiliations of the colleges. This think tank mindset that if the Big Ten adds Stanford, well, my God, now we can all log on to the Stanford database and get all their research and, cure cancer and everything else. So, I'm being overly simplistic on this, but, there's a lot more that goes into it than just front of mind football.
But Steve, you still need Big Ten plus inventory.
Yeah.
You can't get rid of all of the Olympic sports.
You want to see concrete burn, wait till they try and put an Ohio State game on Peacock, which it's going to happen in basketball. I think each team's going to play 2 to 4 games in basketball this year on Peacock. But I don't think there'll be a Peacock Ohio State game, not even Youngstown State. I think Big Ten Network will take that. Until a team is mandated to appear on Peacock every year, I don't think you're going to see an Ohio State game. I think those will be reserved for Rutgers versus Howard and Rutgers versus Northwestern, Big Ten game. I think they're going to have like 8 or 9 football games over the entire course of the season that will be on Peacock streaming. And people were complaining over the weekend. The Guardians, the Cleveland baseball team, played a Sunday morning game, 11:30 on Peacock. And people on Twitter were, I'm not gonna subscribe for that game. Well, first of all, you get off your ass and go down to Progressive Field and watch it in person. If it's that big of a, tremendous thing to put you out of your way, go. Okay, it's not on Bally Sports today. Run down to the stadium and go watch the game, or spend the $5, which as I put all these people on blast on Twitter and said, you are going to spend more than $5 on your designer coffee today, FFS. Don't tell me that $5 is this major affront to your pocketbook to spend for 1 month of Peacock. And you know what? You may like it, and I don't work for NBC Universal, so whatever. I'm just saying, it's not some type of $100 package you got to buy. You can buy it for 1 month and cancel it. So it's not that big a deal.
You can also do the maybe a 7-day free trial. But Sue brings up a good point. Like, I'm not subbing to 5 services to watch sports. At some point, people are just going to be like, I'm going to stand on it's the principle of the thing, that sort of thing. But
you have to pick and choose what's important to you. What do you use? I have a $200 cable bill, and I don't have any idea what we have now built that up to. Like, what all am I buying, and do I really need this and this and this when you have all the streaming options? So yeah,
I agree. You have to pick and choose, but some people are like, I've already chosen 4. I refuse to do a 5th, and it's just like I said, it's the principle of the thing. It's putting your foot down. But you look at Ohio State's terrible, cowardly non-conference schedule next year. You can put all 3 of those games on Peacock. They deserve it. I think at some point, Peacock paying $110 million for an NFL playoff game. I have heard so many people talking about Peacock this week. The amount of, I wouldn't say free advertisement that they're getting, but everybody's talking about it. Nobody's paying. Nobody's being paid to talk about it. So there's so much free advertisement going on with Peacock right now that some of that 110 million should just be attributed to the advertising department, because I don't know how many people are actually going to check it out for that $5 a month or $4.99 or whatever. But I'd be hard pressed to find a sports fan who doesn't at least know what it is, and that's half the battle at this point in this day and age.
Yeah, I think the issue for a lot of Ohio State fans is, how do I stream this to my smart TV, the mechanics of it. And I think, what we need are some of those YouTube how-to guides to show people, okay, you bring it in on your computer. We're so old school, Tony, that we will get one of these streaming things if we want to watch a horse race on streaming. My in-laws owned harness horses forever, and so like sometimes they'll be at a track that you want to watch it and you have to stream it on Facebook, or United States Trotting Association has a stream sometimes, and we'll hook up the HDMI cord to the old laptop and plug it into the back of the TV. Or we now know, you can cast a lot of these things off your phone to or a mobile device to the television. So Peacock, I own I want to say a Vizio TV, and Peacock for whatever reason is not compatible on the Vizio. I would have to do it on the computer and use the HDMI cord, because you cannot cast it from, I guess, my device to the Vizio. So it's kind of a compatibility issue. I think some people find out between the streaming service and their flat screen TV or whatever, whether you can cast it or not. But thankfully, I'm at most of these games, and I'm doing a story now about the schedule for the upcoming season. And I came to the realization I'm going to miss the Purdue game in October. It's at Purdue. My niece, Kelsey, is getting married in Maryland that weekend. And so I'll be 6 states away, albeit still in the Big Ten state, for a wedding. And that'll be the first game I've missed in 21 and a half seasons, dating back to the Michigan game in 2001, when my wife was fraught with child. My daughter, Lindy, who is coincidentally 21 and a half years old, she was born like 3 days after that game. So I didn't get to go to Michigan for the 310-day game up there at Ann Arbor. But that's the last game I've missed. It'll be 276 games in a row for me in person, 21 and a half seasons, and it'll be snapped coming up. And I don't know what to really think about that. And that'll be the only game I've missed all the way back to the 94 season, when I first started doing this full time. So, yeah. So 2 games in almost 30 years.
We should have some kind of Cal Ripken night for you.
Yeah. He didn't do 21 and a half years. I mean,
No.
he did whatever, 2,200 games, whatever it ended up at. Yeah.
What,
That's baseball. It's a
26,
leisure
32, I don't know.
activity. Football's a sport.
Oh, man.
Football's life and death.
Okay. All right. I thought it would have gotten better out of the Cubs and a Reds fan than that, but I will not defend baseball like I would have once.
It's middle of May. The seasons are over for the Cubs and the Reds.
It's true.
Reds are hanging in there. We're only 3-4 games out of first. Hanging in.
I don't watch anymore, and I looked at the standings the other day just out of curiosity, because I now forget something I used to think about 24/7, 365 practically is out of my brain for like weeks at a time. And I just decided I'm going to look at the standings and see if I recognize anything. And I see that the Rays have taken off and they're blowing everyone away. And I see the Cardinals are like 10-20. And I was like, what's going on there? So, yes. I will say, without explanation here, I'm a big fan of the flex schedule. I just think everybody has a different set of rivals. Northwestern's got one rival, Illinois. So why mandate that they play other teams every season? I think we learned. I at least take the example from the SEC and the ACC, matching these teams up that are not rivals to play these games each year just to be placeholders. And I don't see where that works or that has to be done. And it would involve more flexibility for the rest of the schedule, for the schedulers to do with what would be best for the league overall. So anyway, I'm in that camp.
Is that fair to an Ohio State or a Penn State or a Michigan if they have 3 rivals and Northwestern just has Illinois and Indiana just has Purdue, although maybe throw in Michigan State with the brass spittoon or whatever? Is that fair, Mark?
Well, it all depends on how the rest of the schedule's built.
Because we don't need you don't want things to be unfair for Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State when it comes to competing in the Big Ten.
Well, I don't want them to be unfair. I think there's a way to do it. To be somewhat fair. I want to see everyone play as close to a composite 500 schedule from the season before as possible. So I think there can be guidelines and guardrails, and then there can be nuance to building the schedule. I think there can be both, because these leagues have become too unwieldy. If they were tighter, if they were smaller, then you would just say everybody plays everyone. Or back in the old days, you only miss one team in the Big Ten. So rotate that in some fashion. But
I do like the fact that likely you will be the 4-year player will be playing at every stadium in the Big Ten the way they're talking about doing this. And I think that is key, and get a home and away for each player on all campuses as it stands. I guess once USC and UCLA get involved, how they're going to do that. I do think if you get much bigger, I wouldn't be surprised to see you go to conference semifinal games and a championship game if you want to do that, and then have championship week. So like if you just go to 10 regular season games or 11 regular season games, then remember in the COVID year with the championship week where everybody played games that week during the championship game, like you could do that moving forward if you expand, and so you wouldn't necessarily know who you're going to play until that week, the week before, and stuff like that. So I think if you get too much bigger, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a cash grab for some conference semifinal games as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Back to the TV side of things, CBS announced that they've tabbed the Iowa-Penn State game as the first. I believe this will be the first Big Ten game. Well, there will be other Big Ten games on CBS during the day, I believe, before that. But this is the first prime time. Did I get that right? This is the first prime time CBS selection of this season, Iowa at Penn State.
Yeah, interesting for sure. And, NBC, is also new to the Big Ten as well. CBS had the Big Ten, I want to say maybe their last year of doing it was 85 or 86, maybe. 86.
The Ohio State-Michigan game with Brent Musburger at the mic, I believe, was the last one. They
need to bring Brent back to do some CBS Big Ten games this year with Ara Parsegian or whoever. But I think that'd be, as I always say, from 48 hours, that'd be a neat trick. So, any rate, I think that it is going to be kind of exciting, and I think that there is probably a commitment to cross-promote. As we see with the NFL, they cross-promote each other's games, and I think that that in a sense, the Big Ten is going to have more coverage this year and better coverage than any college football league has ever had. I mean, with as many as 3 broadcast network games a day. I mean, guaranteed, a lot of weeks. Now, I know CBS still has to do some SEC inventory this year, but going forward, there could be 3 or even 4 broadcast network games every week for Big Ten. So it's kind of exciting time, and you'll be able to find your team's game pretty easily. It seems like the broadcast networks are in roughly 110 or 115 million homes. The top cable outlets are now down around 80 or 75. So, the Big Ten is going full bore with network television, and I guess for now it's looking pretty good. So the money is there. Obviously, it's crazy the amount of money that is being spent. Like the SEC package for CBS was so inexpensive, and they're paying 5 or 10 times that, on a per game basis to have the Big Ten going forward. It's like, how do they make any money? Or they were making so much money off that SEC package that they realized that even paying 5 or 10 times more per game for a Big Ten package, they can still make money on it. So I'm curious to see how that all works.
Yeah, the value of live sports. I just think that these networks see that this is the last bastion of drawing a large number of people to one event, to one show.
Yep, it's the one place you can't fast forward through the commercials. And now you can switch around, which I think everybody does. But no matter how much switching you do, at some point, all of the games are going to be at the commercial at the same time. So you're going to have to sit and watch something. I'm always interested to see when the game times get announced. Like, to me, this looks like this was a week where CBS had the first pick because they went in and chose Iowa at Penn State. That same week, Wisconsin and Purdue are playing on a Friday. So that'll be a pretty good lead in for that. And then as I look at it, it's probably going to be Rutgers at Michigan on big noon Saturday, unless it's a Big 12 game. So, but I also do kind of like the Big Ten Friday night stuff. They've got 4 or 5 games, I think, scheduled already in Friday night, and I know a lot of people are against that. But when I'm traveling, I don't mind heading to a brew pub and watching a little bit of Big Ten football on a Friday night.
Yep,
absolutely. And those are all conference games?
I don't know if they're all conference games. And I've got kind of an old schedule here, but
they put a Virginia-Maryland game on a Friday night.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So that may be the one non-conference that they grabbed for Friday. They've grabbed 4 games, I believe, so far for Friday. They haven't even announced what network, but you got to assume FS1 probably makes the most sense, for those Friday games. I think Fox Network is going to take that Thursday Nebraska Minnesota game, I think, and promote that as Matt Rule's debut on the road at Minnesota, like they did the Ohio State Minnesota game 2 years ago, and I think they did Penn State and Purdue last year on Thursday night. So I think that's a nice wrinkle for Fox to kick off the college football season on that Thursday night when there's no NFL competition. And I do agree. I don't have a problem with an occasional Friday night game, but I want it to make sense. I think what happened with that Northwestern game a few years ago was they were supposed to be on FS1, which probably is in more homes than Big Ten Network, but then a Yankees playoff game got bumped to Friday because of rain, and they put it on FS1, and the OSU game was relegated to Big Ten Network. And it's like, you've now defeated the purpose of moving the game from Saturday to Friday, because you're not in, marginally fewer homes, but it's not as national a broadcast if it's on Big Ten as opposed to FS1. So I don't know. I know that Ohio is a big high school football state, and they are just now getting around to moving some of those games for this year. And I don't like that, because if you're going to do it, it needs to be done when you announce the schedule the previous October or in November or December, sometime before the calendar year begins. So then the high schools have a 9-month lead to adjust, to contact one another and adjust their schedule to play their game on Thursday night or play their game on Saturday afternoon or Saturday night, to avoid going up against a potential conflict with an Ohio State game, as an example. So I know I have a lot of friends who are high school football people, and they just hate it. They just hate that Ohio State needs to play a game on a Friday night. It's like, whatever. And I'm like, that $1 billion isn't going to make itself. You got to play ball with the networks here every now and then to give them something that they can sell and pay to feed the beast, so to speak. So it's a trickle down effect. I mean, Ohio State makes all this money, and some of it this year will trickle down to Youngstown State, and it's trickled down to Akron and Toledo, and those schools provide scholarships for all the kids that play at these high schools who are so upset that Ohio State's playing a game on Friday night. So you have to look at it from a big picture standpoint as opposed to, oh, they're screwing up my Friday night of high school football. Well, here in Central Ohio, Channel 53 has had a Thursday night game, and high schools have only been too willing to do it for over a decade. So don't come to me and cry me this bull crap that I can't play on Thursday night, bull crap. You did it to play on 53, so you can do it to avoid a conflict with Ohio State. It's one time every 3 or 4 years. It's not that big a deal.
Mark, can I touch on the Quinn Ewers discussion going in here about Ryan Day not putting him on the travel roster for some games in 2021 and how egregious that was. This is a kid who came in late for camp and was the 4th or 5th quarterback on the roster. It was actually the number 5 quarterback, considering I believe they traveled Jagger LaRoe, a senior walk-on. He wasn't ready. I mean, it's a joke at this point that this is still a topic. He wasn't ready. Freshmen, there are plenty of freshmen who stay home and don't travel on for road games. You can only take 72 or 73, something like that. So somebody's gonna have to stay home. And the guy who doesn't yet know the offense is probably going to be one of those who stays home. So I see every once in a while, I see Ohio State fans get up in arms about that, and you shouldn't. There was no situation where he was going to come in and do anything other than hand the ball off if he were to call it on in an emergency. It's let it go. He's gone. Ohio State is doing just fine without him. It was a terrible decision by him to come to Ohio State for money, and hopefully everybody has learned their lessons. And I think everybody's happy with where they are now.
Is he draft eligible after this upcoming season by going to college a year early?
Yep.
Well, that was the decision, back then, was to get his NIL money and start his NFL clock. And then, of course, after the 2021 season, it was obvious that Stroud was going to maintain that job for 2022. So he saw no opportunity to play at Ohio State in 2022. Ultimately, that is what colored his decision, I think, more than anything regarding being on a travel roster or whatever. So usually they travel most, if they have 4 scholarship quarterbacks, they do usually try and take all 4 of them with them on the road because even if a guy's redshirting, they want that guy to understand, because he could be your starter next year, in a road game, and they want him to understand what it's like to be, on the road with the noise and the mechanisms that they use to, signal in plays and everything that goes with it. Plus, in 2 years, if he's back there playing in that stadium, he can say, yes, I was there in 2021. I saw how difficult it is to play there, and have an understanding in his mind of what it means to go to Penn State and play in front of 112,000 people and, go to Michigan, and all these different things. So they do typically make an exception and take as many scholarship quarterbacks as they can fit in. For whatever reason, he didn't make the cut for one or more of those travel games. I had completely blocked that out of my mind, and I don't think that had anything to do with anything. Maybe he's brought it up as one more reason why Ohio State didn't work out for him. Ohio State was just the bad timing for him. He jumped the gun coming in a year early there, and there wasn't going to be anything for him until this year. It's just the fact of the matter. So,
well, and like you said, let him travel in 2021 because he might be the starter in 2022. He was never going to be the starter in 2022 because that was going to be CJ Stroud. So, and we probably said it here. I know I've said it elsewhere, but once he made that decision to enroll early, he sealed his fate on ever being a starting quarterback at Ohio State. It wasn't going to happen because he was never going to have the patience. And he saw the season that CJ Stroud had and was like, well, I could go somewhere and start in 2022, or I can be the backup here or the third string here. So you can't You also can't earn NIL money as the third string or the backup like you can the starter at Texas Tech, where knew he could go. And so, this is every decision he has made has been about money. And so, hopefully it works out for him. I am excited to see Hudson Card at Purdue this year. I'll tell you that.
Hey, I have a question or comment to make. You mentioned that he wasn't ready in 2021 to even be like the backup or whatever. My question, Steve in Ohio, and I'll shut up and listen. Is he ready now to be the starter at Texas?
That was going to be my point.
Is he even ready now?
As soon as the NFL draft was brought up, my thought was, well, Quinn Ewers needs to concentrate on being a better quarterback now, because after a hot first quarter against Alabama that he got knocked out of the game, he did look the part. I remember tuning in week 2 after he lit up Louisiana Monroe or somebody the first week. Then he shows up against Bama, and he looked impressive for a quarter. Then he gets knocked out. He comes back a few games later, and he had one marginal season. He was an average quarterback at best last season. He's got a lot of growing up to do.
And I know Sark has named him the starter, and I would expect him to do well. But I think his problem is you have to have your eye on the future. He's always looking ahead, and he's not been focused enough on where he is. And if you're not looking and focused on where you are and doing well right then and being the best version of yourself, like if you're always just envisioning yourself somewhere else, you're never going to get there as good as you could be if you start where your feet are, as the coaches say.
For sure. Ohio State will march on without Quinn Ewers.
Somehow.
Tony, what you got working this week?
I need to write up a story. I spoke with the Noah Rogers high school coach, Rainier Rackley, this week, and talked to him for about 15 minutes about Noah Rogers, and said, he's from Jacksonville. Rackley is, and Noah Rogers is the best receiver he's ever seen in his life. So I'll write up a story on him and just watching him grow up from the youth leagues to high school. So look for that maybe tomorrow. And I've also just got plenty of other stuff, Buckeye Huddle. And of course, we'll be dropping a Buckeye Weekly episode at some point on Thursday, talking probably about realignment and expansion and stuff like that.
What's going on in Steve Hillwagon's world?
Not a whole heck of a lot. My daughter, I've referenced her earlier, is finished her 3rd year at Miami. We had to move her out of the dorm earlier this week. And now this weekend, she's going to Washington, D.C. to do an internship. So we'll be spending the weekend taking her to Washington, D.C. And then we're driving up to Philadelphia, where I have never spent any time at all in Philadelphia. Going to go sightseeing there for a couple days. And I don't know if you heard all the movement in the background here, but we are working diligently to get our house cleaned up, fixed up, because we're putting it on the market. We're not moving far away, just a couple of miles down the road, but that is taking up a lot of our time here this spring and summer. So more personal stuff in this, as I always say, this 3-month window from mid-April to mid-July, where there's not much going on. The other 9 months out of the year, my days kind of write themselves with practice and game coverage and previews and recaps and everything else. But right now, taking some time for some personal stuff and still squeezing in some work. I'm working on that schedule story. I do foresee Ohio State and Penn State being a night game on NBC. Just hasn't been announced yet. That'd be one of my picks to keep an eye out for. Fox has playoff baseball with the league championship series that weekend, like October 21st. So I do think Ohio State's going to get that long-awaited night game with Penn State. I guess they had it a couple years ago, but they really have been kind of few and far between to even the score on some of these whiteout disasters that they've walked into over there. So I do foresee that as one I'm going to predict in my story later today, that NBC is going to take that game and play it as a primetime game this year.
Yes, Penn State's vaunted whiteout record is less than sterling. It's not that intimidating or that
It's
domineering.
the Ziploc bags of urine that are really the main. It's not the football team on the field. It's the harassment of fans in the band trying to get in and out of the stadium, and the all day of drinking that really kind of put a damper on things over there in not so happy Valley. So yeah, as I say, in the '90s, we showed up. And they're like, "Oh, you're from Ohio. You're coming here to cover the game," or even to Ohio State fans. Well, here, have a beer. Here, have a hot dog. We're glad you're here. We're so glad to be in the Big Ten. Being an independent sucked. Well, then Ohio State starts rocking them around upside the head throughout the '90s and the 2000s. The one year notwithstanding, when it was 63-14, and eventually, as Joe Paterno turned 80, and he was more of a recluse than somebody who kind of set the tone, it became more of a boorish behavior over there. And, they were beating people up in the tailgate lots as opposed to welcoming them with open arms. So I've seen the full gamut from when it was, in Nebraska, it was the same way in 2011. Thank God we're in the Big Ten. They rescued us from that god-awful Big 12, and we're going to make twice as much money for our athletic department. Thank you so much. Here, have a beer. Here, have a hot dog. It hasn't really changed much, really, in the last decade, but if Ohio State continues to rack them around the brains for year after year after year after year, it will change. So I've lived through it once, so yeah.
Didn't Urban Meyer's second team reciprocate 63-14 to
They
the point?
did, and he said he got a good smile out of that because he and Coop were tight for whatever reason. Coop was hanging around. Coop was his NFL liaison at the time because Coop was doing stuff with the Bengals, and so Coop would share some intel from the Bengals on what they thought about some of the Ohio State guys. And Coop was also scouting Ohio State for the Bengals and the teams Ohio State played a little bit for the Bengals. And he and Coop were pretty tight. And he's like, "I got that one for Coop. That was for Coop." He was real excited about that. So, yeah. And that also sent Bill O'Brien packing as well. He threw his arms up in the air and said, "Well, I ain't going to make it happen here." So.
All right. Good stuff out of these two, as always. For Steve, for Tony, make it on back next week on Buckeyes Live, and we will see you then. Thanks, guys.
Yep.